Margaret used to believe her golden years would be filled with warm family dinners, the laughter of grandchildren, and peaceful afternoons teaching countless children with love and putting family above all else. What do you do when the people you loved the most turn you into a stranger? Thrown out of her own home by the very family she built, Margaret faced the world with nothing, no shelter, no friends, no safety net. But this isn't a story of defeat. This is a story of rediscovery, of unexpected friendships, of finding strength when life seems merciless. Margaret would soon feed a hungry stray dog with her last few dollars. She would reconnect with a former student in the most surprising way, and she would prove to the world and herself that it's never too late to start over. Before we dive into her incredible journey, if you enjoy stories of resilience and second chances, consider subscribing to our channel. That way, even when life gets busy, you can always return for more inspiring true stories like this one, tending to her garden. But life had a cruel twist waiting for her. On a bitterly cold December morning, she found herself standing alone on the side of a quiet street, with nothing but an old coat, a small bag, and $8 in her pocket. $8. That was all that remained after a lifetime of sacrifices raising a son as a single mother. So, if you were left with just $8, what would your next chapter look like? Let's begin. Margaret always thought of herself as the luckiest woman in her small Pennsylvania town. Her mornings used to start with the sweet aroma of fresh bread baking in the oven. Her afternoons were filled with the laughter of children in her classroom. And her evenings, oh, those quiet evenings, spent sipping tea while watching the sunset from her front porch. She wasn't rich. She didn't have fancy cars or sparkling jewelry. But she had something that felt far more precious. A life filled with simple joys, a modest but loving home, and most importantly, her only son, Adam. She raised him on her own after her husband died young. Money was always tight, but the house always felt full of warmth, of love, and of purpose. When Adam was little, she would tuck him into bed each night with bedtime stories, her soft voice painting worlds of adventure and kindness. She saved every drawing he made, every little note he scribbled, saying, "Love you, Mom." Neighbors admired her strength. Parents trusted her with their children. Her students remembered her years later as Mrs. Margaret, the teacher who made math feel like magic. Years rolled by, and though her hair turned silver, her heart stayed young. She looked forward to watching Adam build his own family, imagining noisy Thanksgiving dinners, grandchildren running around her garden, and Sunday afternoons filled with stories and laughter. Then, life began to shift in quiet, uncomfortable ways. ID started when Adam met Natalie. Margaret really tried, to welcome Natalie into the family. She cooked her favorite dishes, invited her to cozy movie nights, and even gave her the diamond brooch that once belonged to Margaret's grandmother. But Natalie wasn't like the other women in their town. She came from money. She had grown up in a world of private schools, designer handbags, and spa retreats. Her smiles were polite but cold, her hugs brief and stiff. Margaret could sense it. She wasn't good enough for Natalie. Still, she smiled through it all, hoping time would soften things. But as weeks turned to months, Margaret's home, her safe haven, began to feel like someone else's house. Dinners became quieter. Her opinions were brushed aside. Her presence became inconvenient. She remembered one particular evening, trying to join a conversation at the dinner table. Natalie's lips curved into a forced smile before saying, "Maybe you should go rest, Margaret. You must be tired." It stung deeper than any insult, from the woman who once held her son's tiny hands, to being treated like unwanted background noise in her own home. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the attic, Margaret stumbled upon Adam's old drawings. She held them close, remembering the little boy who used to beg her to stay up 5 more minutes for just one more story. A lump formed in her throat. Where had those years gone? How did love turn into distance? And how did she become a guest in the life she built from scratch? Yet, through the ache, she smiled, because for a long time, her life had been wonderfully full. Sometimes, it's comforting to remember the good before facing the storm. By the way, if you feel stories like these touch your heart, you might want to subscribe to our channel. It's an easy way to come back to stories that make you feel seen, understood, and inspired. Margaret had no idea, but the chapters ahead were going to change her life forever. It didn't happen overnight. No, it crept in like the slow drizzle of a gray morning, quiet, steady, and unnoticed, until it soaked through every corner of Margaret's life. A tea first. It was little things. Adam, who used to call her every evening, now replied with short texts. Natalie, who smiled politely during dinners, began spending more time catching up with friends on her phone while Margaret sat silently, her fork idling on her plate. The cozy family dinners that once made the house feel alive turned into awkward meals where Margaret barely spoke, and no one seemed to notice. The front porch, where Margaret and Adam used to sip sweet tea and talk about life, was now overtaken by expensive patio furniture Margaret wasn't allowed to use because it's too delicate. One evening, she tried baking her famous apple pie, the recipe her mother taught her, the one that once made Adam beam with joy, but when she brought it to the table, Natalie simply said, "Oh, we don't really eat sweets anymore. We're trying to stay clean." Margaret laughed softly. "Well, maybe just one small slice for old time's sake." Natalie didn't even glance up. "Maybe next time, Margaret." That night, the untouched pie sat in the kitchen, and so did Margaret, staring at it, realizing she was becoming invisible in her own home. What hurt wasn't Natalie's coldness, it was Adam's silence. The little boy who once thought her apple pie was magic now watched his mother's heart break and said nothing. Then came the moment she would never forget. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. Margaret overheard Natalie talking on the phone to a friend, her voice sharp and dismissive. "I mean, it's exhausting," Natalie complained. "Taking care of his mother is like babysitting an old woman. I can't stand it anymore." Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a laundry basket, her heart shattering into pieces too small to mend. That evening, when she confronted Adam, he didn't defend her. He didn't hold her hand. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just stared at the floor, then mumbled, maybe it's time for you to consider moving into assisted living. It'd be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone." The words echoed in her ears like a cruel joke. Margaret swallowed her tears and forced a smile. "Easier for who, Adam? Easier for you to forget I exist?" He didn't respond. Margaret thought back to all those years working, 2 jobs to put food on the table, the late nights helping Adam with his homework, the birthdays she made special even when there was barely enough money to pay the bills, and now, after a lifetime of giving, she was simply inconvenient. Still, she held her dignity, because sometimes, strength isn't about fighting back. It's about walking away with your head held high. The next day, without ceremony, Natalie handed her a small suitcase, already packed. 100 emotions boiled inside Margaret: anger, sorrow, disbelief, but above all, quiet resolve. She took the suitcase and walked out of the house she once built, leaving behind a family that no longer cared to remember. Out on the porch, Margaret turned one last time, whispering under her breath, "I didn't raise you for this, Adam." And then, she walked toward an unknown future, with nothing but a bag and $8 in her purse. It's strange, isn't it? How the people we love most can make us feel the most alone. If you've ever felt unappreciated or forgotten, know that you are not alone. Stories like Margaret's remind us how life can twist, but also how it can turn around when we least expect it. Subscribing to our channel ensures you won't miss the moments when life surprises you in the best ways. Ahead of Margaret were chapters she could never have imagined, and for the first time, freedom waited just around the corner. Margaret stood at the corner of Maple and 6th, her small suitcase resting by her feet, the wind tugging at her coat sleeves. She opened her worn leather purse and counted it again. $8 and some loose change. $8. After a lifetime of sacrifices, after decades of raising a son, teaching hundreds of children, loving fiercely, it all boiled down to $8 lonely. Her fingers trembled from the cold, or maybe from something deeper: fear, betrayal, emptiness. For a brief moment, she felt paralyzed. Where would she go? Who would take her in? She had no siblings left, no friends close by, no safety net to catch her. The world suddenly felt enormous, and she felt very, very small. A bus slowed down nearby, brakes hissing in the chilly air. The driver, a gruff-looking man in his 50s with a thick beard, leaned out the window and shouted, "You headed somewhere, ma'am?" Margaret hesitated. She had nowhere to go. The driver noticed her hesitation. His stern features softened. "Hop on," he said kindly. "I'm headed downtown. No charge." Margaret blinked, surprised. Are you sure? He grinned. Ma'am, I've hauled folks for 30 years. Sometimes it ain't about tickets. It's about decency. Her lips trembled into a smile. Thank you. I think I needed to hear that. Inside the bus, she sat near the window, watching her old neighborhood disappear behind her. The place where dreams turned into heartache. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the night before. As the bus rolled down Main Street, she spotted a small food cart by a gas station. The smell of grilled cheese sandwiches wafting through the air, making her mouth water. The driver noticed her glance. If you get off here, there's a shelter just a block down that street. Margaret nodded, grateful. She stepped off the bus, her entire fortune reduced to a crumpled $5 bill and 3 singles. Her fingers hovered over the last $5, until a soft whimper caught her attention. In the alley behind the gas station, a scrawny little dog, shivering, curled up by a trash can. Patches of fur were missing, ribs showing, eyes dull but still hopeful. Margaret swallowed hard. She had $8 to her name. And yet, something inside her shifted. Maybe she couldn't save herself, but she could save someone smaller, weaker, more alone than she was. Without thinking, she approached the cart and ordered 2 hot dogs, one for herself, and one for the trembling pup. The vendor smiled, handing over the food. Rough day, ma'am. Margaret gave a soft, tired laugh. Rough year. She knelt down, unwrapped the hot dog, and gently placed it near the pup. The little dog hesitated, then inched forward, devouring it in seconds. Margaret bit into her own hot dog, savoring the simplest of comforts. Warm food on a cold day, and a moment of shared survival between 2 forgotten souls. As the dog licked her hand gratefully, Margaret whispered, "Looks like it's you and me now, buddy." There was no mansion, no roaring fireplace, no loving family, just an alley, a cheap meal, a stray dog, and strangely, a feeling she hadn't known in months. Connection, and somehow, it didn't feel like rock bottom anymore. It felt like a beginning. Margaret looked up at the sky, a faint smile creeping across her face. Maybe life's not done with me yet. If you've made it this far, I hope you're seeing it too, how life has this quiet way of bringing small kindnesses, even in our hardest moments. Sometimes, all it takes is a stranger's smile, or sharing a meal with a hungry soul, to remember we still matter. If you'd like to hear more stories of unexpected kindness and second chances, subscribing to our channel is an easy way to stay connected. Even when life gets a little noisy, Margaret's journey was far from over, and the next chapter would remind her just how much good can still happen, even when you have nothing left. The shelter wasn't anything like Margaret had imagined. It smelled faintly of old blankets and disinfectant. The walls were painted a dull beige, and the cafeteria served food that was generously called edible. People wandered in and out, some with hollow eyes, others clinging desperately to whatever dignity they had left. Margaret hesitated at the entrance, suitcase in hand, the stray pup, now wrapped in her coat, trembling against her chest. The receptionist barely looked up. "Name? Margaret?" she replied softly. "Any relatives we can contact?" Her chest tightened. "No, not anymore." With a nod, the woman scribbled on a clipboard and motioned toward a narrow hallway. Margaret's room, if you could call it that, was a thin mattress on a metal frame, a small dresser missing one handle, and a cracked window that let in the sound of passing traffic. It wasn't home, but it was safe. That night, she lay awake, staring at the peeling ceiling, her new little friend curled up by her feet. A tear slipped down her cheek. How had it come to this? But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began to happen. Margaret noticed the people around her weren't just the homeless, they were people with names, stories, and battles of their own. There was Ben, a retired truck driver who lost everything after his wife passed. Linda, a former nurse who'd been blindsided by medical bills. And then, there was Sophie. Sophie was 22, sharp-witted, with wild curly hair and an attitude big enough to fill the room. She was pregnant, abandoned by her family, and fiercely independent. Their first conversation happened over a disastrous shelter lunch. Margaret poking at what appeared to be grayish meatloaf. Sophie rolling her eyes. "Don't bother," Sophie muttered. "That thing could survive a nuclear war." Margaret couldn't help but laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks. And just like that, a friendship began. Sophie was blunt but caring. She helped Margaret navigate the shelter system, showed her where to find the decent coffee nearby, and even convinced her to join a free book club at the community center. In return, Margaret shared bedtime stories with Sophie, stories she used to tell Adam, stories of knights and courage, of kindness and perseverance. Some nights, when the shelter grew too loud, Sophie would sneak into Margaret's room, belly round, eyes heavy, and they would talk until they both drifted off to sleep. Through Sophie, Margaret began to feel useful again, needed, alive. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly dreadful meal, Margaret joked, "If I survive this meatloaf, I can survive anything." Sophie grinned. "Forget surviving, lady. You're gonna thrive. Just wait." And for the first time, Margaret believed it. She wasn't finished. Life hadn't counted her out just yet. One evening, as they sipped terrible instant coffee on the front steps of the shelter, Margaret looked around at the worn-out chairs, the flickering street lamp, the scruffy little dog by her side, and smiled. "Funny," she said quietly. "This is the first time in a long while I don't feel invisible." Sophie nudged her playfully. "That's because you ain't. People like you, they don't fade away. They bounce back." Margaret chuckled. "Let's see if I can bounce without breaking something." And they both burst into laughter, scaring off a nearby pigeon. Sometimes, hope doesn't arrive in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes quietly, sitting on old shelter steps, between sips of cheap coffee, next to an unlikely friend. If you believe in second chances, don't forget to subscribe. It's the best way to stay connected to stories that remind us no matter where you are in life, it's never too late to begin again. Margaret's next chapter wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming joy, one small step at a time. Margaret wasn't sure what drew her there that morning. Maybe it was the smell of real coffee drifting through the air. Maybe it was the laughter spilling out the windows. Or maybe it was simply curiosity. After weeks at the shelter, anything that didn't smell like canned beans was worth investigating. The sign above the little brick building read, "The Kindred Cup Coffee and Community." Below it, in smaller letters, "A place where nobody feels invisible." Those last words tugged at something deep inside her. Margaret stepped inside, bracing herself for the usual stares, the dismissive glances reserved for people who had fallen through the cracks, but instead, warmth. Not just the cozy feel of the room, but genuine warmth in people's faces. No one looked away. No one pretended she wasn't there. Behind the counter stood a tall man with salt and pepper hair, busy frothing milk for a latte. His back was broad, movements quick but graceful, like someone who took pride in small details. He glanced up, and their eyes met. Something flickered in his gaze. A pause, a frown, then shock. "Mrs. Margaret?" he asked slowly, wiping his hands on his apron. She blinked, confused. Do I know you?" A smile broke across his face. "Sixth grade math class, 1989. You used to call me the whirlwind because I could never sit still." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Peter Collins?" Peter laughed, stepping around the counter. "I can't believe it's you. You were my favorite teacher." A laugh bubbled up in Margaret's chest, chasing away weeks of sorrow. "If I remember correctly, I also sent you to detention more than any other student." Peter grinned. "And I deserved every minute." They sat at a corner booth, mugs of rich, steaming coffee between them, catching up on decades lost to time. Peter explained how, after years of corporate stress and personal loss, he walked away from the rat race and opened the Kindred Cup. "I wanted a place where no one felt forgotten," he said simply. Margaret's eyes misted. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." Peter offered her something she hadn't heard in weeks, an invitation. "We could use some help here, you know. Volunteering, serving, even teaching. People around here, they need someone like you." Her heart stirred for the first time in ages. Later that afternoon, Margaret tied on a borrowed apron and rolled up her sleeves. The work was simple but meaningful: pouring coffee, wiping tables, listening to lonely souls who drifted in off the streets, and they listened back. For the first time since losing her home, Margaret felt useful, seen, needed. Funny moments sprinkled the day too, like when she confused the espresso machine for a toaster and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Peter teased, "Still terrible with machines, huh?" She shot back, "That's why I taught math, not shop class." And they laughed. The kind of laugh that shakes off the dust of sadness. A tea closing time. As they stacked chairs, Peter nudged her. "You've still got that spark, Mrs. Margaret." She smiled, feeling that spark finally reignite. It wasn't just about serving coffee. It was about rebuilding, reconnecting, remembering her own worth, and maybe, just maybe, it was about planting the seeds of a brand new life. Sometimes life circles back in the most unexpected ways. The students we nurture, the kindness we give, it doesn't vanish. It finds its way back, exactly when we need it most. If you've ever wondered if your kindness made a difference, trust me, it does. And if stories like this bring you comfort, subscribe to our channel. You never know when the next chapter of your own life might be waiting just around the corner. Margaret walked home that night, not to a mansion, not to riches, but to something far greater, hope, and that was a beginning. The Kindred Cup had become Margaret's second home. Every morning, she'd roll up her sleeves, tie on her apron, and serve coffee with a side of warm smiles. The once invisible woman now stood tall behind the counter, greeting regulars by name, sharing stories, and even teaching free math lessons to local kids on weekends. But life still had surprises waiting for her. One chilly afternoon, a young woman walked into the cafe, carrying a camera bag and a bright smile. Her name was Claire, a local journalist working on a human interest series about resilience. Peter, with a mischievous grin, said, "You should talk to Mrs. Margaret here. She's got a story that'll knock your socks off." At first, Margaret hesitated. Her life had been private for so long. The pain, the betrayal, the quiet rebuilding. Was it worth telling the world? But something inside whispered, yes. And so, over 2 cups of coffee, Margaret told Claire everything: the years of sacrifice, the heartbreak of losing her family, the nights spent in the shelter, and the miracle of finding new purpose at the Kindred Cup. Claire listened, eyes wide, scribbling notes furiously. The next morning, Margaret's story appeared on the front page of the town newspaper with the headline, "Forgotten No More. Local woman rebuilds her life, 1 cup of coffee at a time." By lunchtime, the cafe was packed. By evening, the story was shared online. Within days, it went viral. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. Then thousands of strangers across the country read about the woman who had been tossed aside by her family, only to rise again through kindness and community. Margaret's phone, which hadn't rung in weeks, now buzzed constantly. Old friends called in tears, apologizing for not reaching out sooner. Former students, now grown with families of their own, sent messages saying, "You changed my life, Mrs. Margaret." Margaret blinked through tears of disbelief. People remembered her. People cared. Then came the letter that would change everything. A prominent law firm, specializing in elder abuse and wrongful eviction, reached out after reading her story. They offered to represent her, pro bono. Margaret stared at the letter, her hands trembling. For the first time in her life, she had power again. Peter, standing beside her, smiled proudly. "Told you, Mrs. Margaret. The world needed to hear your story." Margaret chuckled. "I never imagined I'd be trending on social media at my age." Peter teased, "You're officially cooler than any of us now." She laughed harder than she had in years. The cafe customers joined in, applauding her bravery. Even the little stray dog, now named Lucky, barked happily at the attention. But beyond the headlines and the cameras, what truly touched Margaret's heart was the quiet truth she'd almost forgotten. She mattered. Her story mattered. Her life mattered. And maybe, just maybe, there were more chapters left to write. As she walked home that evening, streetlights glowing softly above, Margaret whispered to herself, "This is what rising feels like." Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize how much strength we truly have. If you've ever felt discarded or unseen, Margaret's story is proof. You can always start over. And if stories like this warm your heart, we'd love for you to subscribe. You never know, the next story could be yours. The road ahead for Margaret wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming everything she thought she'd lost, and more. And the next chapter was just beginning. While Margaret's world blossomed anew, her old family, the very people who had discarded her, watched from afar. It began with silence, then whispers, then awkward phone calls that rang once, twice, then stopped, as if guilt couldn't quite push them to finish dialing. Adam saw the news article pop up on his social media feed, his mother's smiling face next to the headline, "From Abandoned to Beloved, a Mother's Unstoppable Comeback." Natalie read the comments flooding in, thousands praising Margaret, calling her an inspiration, a symbol of strength and grace. Suddenly, the silence in their big, expensive house felt deafening. Suddenly, the coldness they'd shown her weighed heavier. One morning, the inevitable happened. Margaret was wiping down tables at the Kindred Cup when Peter approached, eyebrows raised. "You've got visitors." Her heart skipped. She looked up, and there they were, Adam older than she remembered, but with familiar hesitation in his stance. Natalie stylish as ever, but her confidence cracked at the edges, and behind them, two little boys, her grandsons, wide-eyed, clinging shyly to their father's legs. Margaret's throat tightened. It was the first time she'd laid eyes on her grandsons. Adam stepped forward, voice low. "Mom, we've been following everything. The news, the interviews. We didn't realize how badly we'd treated you." Margaret stood tall, apron still on, her hands steady. "You didn't realize?" she said, voice calm but firm. "Or you didn't care until the world noticed?" Natalie flinched, color draining from her cheeks. The older grandson tugged at Adam's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, is she really the math magician?" Margaret's lips quivered into a small smile. Adam tried again. We want to make it right. The boys, they want to know their grandma." Peter stood protectively nearby, arms crossed, watching like a loyal guard dog. Margaret looked at the small faces of her grandsons, then at the son who once clung to her hand, and the daughter-in-law who had once packed her bags and pushed her out the door. For a brief second, the pain threatened to rise. The nights in the shelter, the meals skipped, the feeling of being forgotten. But then, she remembered. She remembered the calf filled with laughter. She remembered Sophie's hugs, Peter's support, Lucky's wagging tail. She remembered the strength she found within herself. "You're welcome to order a coffee," Margaret said, voice steady. "But I no longer serve guilt trips." Peter let out a small chuckle from behind. The boys giggled, too young to understand the tension, but sensing the humor. Natalie flushed. But Adam looked like a man humbled, regret weighing on his shoulders. "We're not here for handouts," Adam whispered. We hope someday you'll let us back into your life." Margaret's heart softened, not for Adam, not for Natalie, but for the boys. "For new beginnings. I make no promises," she said quietly. "Trust is rebuilt, not demanded." Adam nodded, eyes glassy. "We understand." The boys, sensing the shift, approached hesitantly. "Grandma," the younger one said shyly, "can we come back and hear your stories? Like you told Daddy?" A tear slipped down Margaret's cheek. Stories. That's where healing could begin. "Maybe," she whispered, crouching to their level. "Maybe one day soon." And in that bustling cafe, filled with regulars and new faces, a broken family stood, awkward, uncertain, but perhaps at the beginning of something new. Sometimes life gives us second chances. Sometimes it gives us the wisdom to know when to accept them and when to walk away. Margaret had discovered her worth, and now she could choose when and how to share it. If stories like this remind you of the power of dignity and forgiveness, we'd love to have you subscribe to our channel. Stories like Margaret's prove it's never too late to reclaim your voice. That evening, Margaret locked up the cafe, heart full, knowing she had turned from forgotten to unforgettable, and the next sunrise held endless possibilities. Margaret never imagined she'd be building a brand new life at 70, but there she was, standing in the mirror of her modest new apartment, fastening a name tag that read, "Margaret Mentor and Storyteller." The small space wasn't luxurious, no grand chandeliers or expensive decor, but it was hers. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, shelves lined with donated books, a worn but comfy armchair nestled in the corner where Lucky curled up every morning. The Kindred Cup. She had become more than just a volunteer. She was now the heart of the place. People didn't come just for the coffee anymore. They came for the warmth, for the stories, for the quiet wisdom of a woman who had walked through the storm and come out stronger. She started a weekly group story Saturdays where young and old gathered to hear tales of resilience, kindness, and hope. Some nights, the little cafe was so packed they had to set up chairs on the sidewalk. Margaret chuckled to herself. From forgotten to standing room only. Peter often teased, "We should start charging admission. You're practically a local celebrity now." She'd laugh and reply, "If people pay me in smiles, I'll retire a millionaire." Beyond the cafe, Margaret found herself reconnecting with the world. She joined the library board, volunteered at the local school to tutor struggling kids, and even signed up for a pottery class, something she always dreamed of but never dared to try. At 70, her hands were learning new skills, her heart learning new rhythms. One afternoon, while attempting to mold a particularly lopsided clay bowl, she laughed so hard she nearly fell off her stool. The instructor, a sprightly man in his 50s, grinned. "Don't worry, Margaret. It's abstract art." She wiped her tears of laughter. "If this is art, I'm a modern-day Michelangelo." More importantly, she felt alive, not surviving, but thriving. Her family? They visited sometimes. The boys listened to her stories with wide eyes. Adam helped fix up her apartment, quieter, more respectful. Natalie was polite, if not entirely comfortable. Margaret didn't need their validation anymore. She had built something far greater, a community, a purpose, a life that was fully hers, and for the first time, she chose where her energy went, who received her kindness, and where her heart belonged. One Sunday evening, after closing the cafe, Peter brought out a chocolate cake with "Happy New Life, Margaret" scrawled in bright blue icing. The room erupted in applause. Sophie, now a new mom, cradled her baby girl and wiped away tears. "You gave me hope when I had none," she whispered to Margaret. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "That's what we do. We lift each other up." That night, as Margaret walked Lucky along the quiet street, stars blinking above, she thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. She whispered into the night air, 70, and just getting started, because age was just a number. What truly mattered was refusing to let life decide when your story ends. To anyone listening, anyone feeling forgotten, anyone fearing it's too late, Margaret's journey stands as proof. The best chapters can still be unwritten, if you believe it too. We'd love for you to subscribe and stay connected, because every person deserves a second act, sometimes even a third or fourth. Margaret smiled up at the stars, Lucky trotting happily beside her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't forgotten. She was alive, and her next adventure was only just beginning. As someone who's spent decades studying human behavior and life transformations, I can tell you Margaret's story isn't just rare, it's profoundly important. Why? Because it reminds us of a truth we often forget. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity. And it's certainly never too late to find new joy, even after life has knocked you down. Think about it. How many of us have felt overlooked, unappreciated, or even pushed aside by the people closest to us? Margaret's journey shows us something powerful. The worst chapters in life don't have to be the final ones. With a little courage, a touch of kindness, and the right people around you, you can turn everything around. But here's something I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a turning point like Margaret? A moment when you realized it was time to reclaim your life? Tell us in the comments. Your story could inspire someone else who needs it today. And if Margaret's resilience moved you, just imagine the incredible stories we have coming up next. Go ahead and subscribe. You won't just get more uplifting stories, you'll be joining a community of people who believe in second chances and stronger comebacks. And if you're still with us, don't stop here. Check out the next video on your screen. It's another true story that will fill your heart with hope, because here, we believe it's never too late, and you are never forgotten.